Hey everyone, welcome to a new series that we're going to be running on the channel. This series is going to revolve around the action-adventure genre. You probably saw in the thumbnail, I had Ride in there. And a big inspiration of mine is games like Metal Gear Rising. Games by, Platinum Games, things like Devil May Cry. Those are games that I really appreciate just because of their battle systems and things like that. The amount of control that the game gives you so that you can actually get good at the game. It's kind of like the same reason why I like things like Dark Souls, which we'll hopefully be kind of going into in future series. But today we're going to be focusing on a couple of things, just setting up our actual game and just talking about, what it is that we're going to do throughout this project. So in terms of what we're going to do throughout this project, we'll be working in 3D in Unity, which is something that we haven't done too often in this channel. We're going to be animating a 3D character, so we're going to use a couple of external softwares for that. Really just Blender and maybe a little bit of Photoshop-esque software. And all of this is just going to help us to tie our skills into, like what are we going to do in terms of 3D games and things like that. We're going to figure out how our camera is going to be working and everything like that. Some level design theory, I guess. And just enemies and, the different dynamics of combos and things like that. So this is going to be a really interesting series. I'm really excited to get into this. I'm pretty sure that we're going to go all the way with this project and we're going to learn pretty much everything that we need to. This is definitely something that I will be using in the future, skills that I'm going to be taking into proper games that I'll be making in the future. So without further introduction, how are we going to set things up? So you're probably also looking at a scene like this. When you created your project, what you would have wanted to do is go to a new project and not hit the 2D tab, but hit the 3D tab. And then you just come into it and you would have seen something like this. And so the first thing we're going to do is we're going to create something for our player to walk on when we put our player into the game. So I'm going to go to hierarchy, create, and I'm going to go to 3D object and then terrain. Now terrain has a special place in my heart because that's kind of the first thing I started to do in Unity, was just figure out how does terrain work? How do I, make levels? Because you think the first thing you're going to do is just figure out how you're going to develop the environments for your characters to walk around. So I've been working with this for a little bit, and what we'll do is we'll just adjust the size of our terrain. So our terrain here, it's got a couple of tabs for us to edit off of, and we'll be exploring these in future parts, but for today we're just going to hit this cog right here, and your units would be set at 1,000 by default, but because I've been messing around with this project a little bit, my terrain width and length are 500. I'm going to change that to 250 so you can see our terrain actually changing as I do that. And then click on our terrain, hit F, and we're centered so we can see our terrain pretty clearly. And I'm just going to leave things at that. Now we're going to need a player character, and to add our player character we simply just right click, go to 3D object. I'm going to go for a capsule just because it kind of demonstrates how an upright character would be. So here's our capsule. It's above the terrain, which is okay, so we're not going to fall through the terrain, but we aren't going to fall at all if we don't add a couple of components to this. So I'm going to go to add component, physics, and then rigid body. I wanted to say physics 2D, but just physics this time, and we're going to rigid body, and we're using gravity, so our character is going to fall. And I'm tempted to start up the game, but I need to see if the camera's aligned. So we select our camera. We can kind of see a blip there, which is our player. I'm going to zoom in, zoom in, zoom in, zoom in, and that'll probably be the right place. And then I'll hit play. Okay, great. So it was a little bit of a bounce there, bit of a delay for some reason, but our character is definitely colliding with the terrain. Our terrain looks a little boring, so there are a couple of things we can do to our terrain. One thing that we can do is we can go over to this paintbrush tab over here, and I can add a new texture to my terrain. So it says textures, no terrain textures defined, and I've imported a texture myself. Really all I did was just go and save a PNG that I made in the assets folder, and now it's in our project. Double click, add, and there you go. We have nicer terrain. It's nothing, too professional, but we're not getting onto that yet. Okay, so we have this capsule here, but we want it to move around. We want it to act as an actual player. You've probably peeked that I have a player script, and you've probably peeked that I have a couple of other components that we'll talk about in a later part. But this player script allows us to move around our player. It has a rotation dynamic attached to it, so we can actually rotate the player. So in fact, I'm going to get rid of our capsule, and to demonstrate this better, I'm going to use a cube. So I'll just go to add component again, physics, rigid body, and then I'm going to take this player script and I'm going to attach it to our cube. So this script allows us to move around this terrain plane. And so if I play it, you can see I got my cube moving around. So that's pretty good, because we're going to need our player to move around. We're not going to be animating in loads of different directions or something weird like that. So at least we've got that working. For now, we're not going to worry about jumping, because we'll explore that again in a later part. But today we're just doing a little bit of setup and overview. So I got my cube in the scene. It's moving around, but it's not really... the camera is a little bit of a problem, as you saw. I had tank controls on, and I was moving relative to the world, but the camera wasn't really helping me out in that. So in fact, to move towards the camera, I had to turn around the character all the way and then press up, which is kind of counterintuitive, because you'd think I need to press back or down or something like that to come towards the camera. And so we'll be exploring how we can have our camera follow us around. And so I researched around and I found a script that allows us to have a camera that will follow us around. And this is called a follow camera. It's the same kind of thing you'd see in something like Super Mario Galaxy. And I thought it was pretty relevant for what we'll be doing. You'll see that we're going to need to tweak it a little bit and make a couple of offsets. But just to demonstrate how it works, I'm going to apply this script to our main camera and give you an explanation as we go through. So our main camera now has that script, and we'll go to the main camera in the inspector. And you can see that it has a target. Now the target has to be the player game object, because it wants to follow that. And we have a unit here called damping, which we'll explore when we're playing the game. Now one thing that you'll see is our camera is not quite in line with our player character, and I'm going to play what you'll see if your camera is not in line with your character and you've applied this script. Okay, so it seems like our camera is doing like a matrix shot around our player game object, and if we look at the scene view, this is completely wrong. This is not what we want. So what are we going to do? We're going to line up our main camera with our character, the back of our character. And this is something that we'll adjust in future by making some values called offset, so that we actually have a desired angle instead of like this rigid angle that I'm going to show you we'll have from this initial take on how our camera is working. So I make the main camera a child of our cube, and then I reset all of its transformations. And because we won't be able to actually see our character, I'm going to pull it out, and you can see in the camera preview right there what happens. Now I could pull this camera up, but it won't do us much good in terms of seeing forward, because the camera is actually going to want to dip down and look directly at our character, and that's when our offset values come in. So I'm just going to reset it again and just have it following exactly the back of our character. I can do a couple of things to just kind of make it seem a little less frustrating, just making the field of view a little wider and things like that in the inspector. But other than that, there's not much we can do. So before I hit play, there's one more thing that I need to do, and that is to deattach the main camera from the cube so that we don't have rigid movement, because if the camera is attached to the cube, it's just going to stay in the same place no matter what script we apply. It wouldn't have even mattered that we applied a script, but we applied this script so we can have some flexibility with how our camera moves in future. And so I'm going to hit play and we'll see what happens. Okay, so we can see here that I'm moving the cube around, and there's a little bit of a lag that this camera has in terms of following our character around, and that's kind of something we desire because we want a little bit of flexibility with how the camera works with us. We don't want it to be too snappy. We want a little bit of delay, because that would just make the experience more smooth. If our camera locked onto the back of our character completely, we would only see the back of our character all throughout the game. We wouldn't see, the front. We wouldn't get any dynamic angles and things like that. And that's just really not what we want. So what happens if I change the damping in the inspector? So while I'm playing the game, I can mess around with these units in the inspector. And I've hit 0.25, and we'll just take a look. So when I lower the damping effect, the main camera follows our character with a little less precision, which might be something that we desire. Now, I did talk about how frustrating it is to just have the camera fixed like this. And so in the next part, we're going to be focusing on making a couple of tweaks to our camera, adding a feature for our character to jump, and then in the future we'll be talking about rigging up a character, rigging up a 3D model, and making some animations and importing those animations. In terms of those future projects, a really good thing to do would be to download Blender and just have a little fiddle around with that. That's a 3D modeling software where you can make your own rigs and animations and things like that, and it works really good side by side with Unity. And so we're going to be working with that a lot because this is a very budget creating channel, and Blender is pretty budget. It's free, just like Unity 3D. But anyway, thank you so much for watching this tutorial. I hope it helped you out. I'll be leaving the scripts in the description below. If you like this part, then go ahead, leave a like, subscribe and things like that, because we're going to have loads of content in the future. We're going to be continuing with that run and gun project, and this project will be running kind of side by side for the next weeks. But thank you again, and thank you for all the support. Hope you have a beautiful day, and I'll see you in the next part.